shakka muna a Najeriya. Ku saurari WADR.
West Africa Democracy Radio.
Je suis à Dakar, au Sénégal, et j'écoute la WADR 94.9 FM.
WADR, promoting dialogue.
Good evening and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world at wadr.org. Welcome to Newslink. Here are the top stories. Ivorian opposition party leader Tijan Cham appeals to the UN following his removal from the electoral roll. Ghana minority vows to resist rerun at Ablokwa North, demands immediate conclusion of election results.
We therefore request that your office takes immediate steps without any more delay. Deploy adequate security personnel to the Electoral Commission, ensure an enabling environment for the peaceful and lawful conclusion and collation and declaration process in Ablokwa North.
National dialogue in Senegal concludes with mixed reactions.
Ce dialogue n'a pas été un simple exercice de forme. Il a été un espace de parole libre, un lieu de vérité.
This dialogue was not a simple exercise in form. It was a space for free speech.
And Nigeria's President Tinubu approves release of 2 billion naira, 20 trucks of rice for Mokwa flood victims. Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
Here is Augustine Coley with Newslink.
Many thanks for joining our broadcast. Let's begin in Côte d'Ivoire, where ahead of the October presidential elections, 4 prominent opposition figures have been excluded from the final voter list and declared ineligible to contest in the general polls. The country's Independent Electoral Commission made the announcement on Wednesday. Tijan Cham, the leader of Côte d'Ivoire's main opposition party, the Democratic Party of Côte d'Ivoire (PDCR), was struck from the voter roll in April after a court ruling cast doubt on his Ivorian nationality at the time of registration. Former President Laurent Gbagbo, his former right-hand man, Charles Blegoudé, and exiled former Prime Minister Guillaume Soro have been barred for years over past convictions and were not reinstated. None of the 4 will be allowed to contest the presidential race or vote. Electoral Commission head Ibrahim Koulibaly said Monday the voter list will not be reversed before the October 25 election. Meanwhile, the president of the opposition PDCR party, Tijan Cham, has referred his removal from the electoral roll to the United Nations for arbitration. Christopher Atijo has more details in this report.
In a note on Wednesday, the PDCI explains that it has referred the matter to the UN body in accordance with the rights and freedoms enshrined in the Constitution of Côte d'Ivoire and the primacy that Article 123 of the latter grants to treaties or agreements duly ratified, in particular the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The party recalled the state of Côte d'Ivoire accepted the jurisdiction, namely the United Nations Human Rights Committee, by ratifying the optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights on March 5, 1997. According to the text, the PDCI calls on all its activists and all Ivorians to remain mobilized behind the hope represented by Cheikh Tidiane Cham for a profound transformation of Côte d'Ivoire for the benefit of all. The PDCI-RDA is renewing its call to the international community to invest significantly in the organization of a fair presidential election in October 2025, which is inclusive, transparent, and without discrimination. Recall the Ivorian court ordered the removal of Tidiane Cham from the electoral roll, arguing that he had lost his Ivorian nationality when he registered to vote in 2022. On March 19, 2025, former Credit Suisse CEO Tijani Chiam renounced his allegiance to the French Republic. Senior Magistrate Augustin Yao stated that he thus automatically regained Ivorian nationality because he was Ivorian by descent.
Christopher, our teacher, with that report. Meanwhile, at least 5 inmates at an Ivorian prison were killed when a routine search turned into a violent clash. Ivorian Public Prosecutor Abel Mbeli Nyo said on Wednesday that prisoners in Bouaké, the country's second largest city, reacted with hostility to a routine search for prohibited items on Tuesday, leading to the death and prosecution of 29 people, including 6 prison officers and 23 prisoners injured. Yo added that when security officers arrived in the building, they were attacked by prisoners armed with clubs, machetes, and other blunt objects. Imo Edit completes the story.
The officers fired warning shots to cover their retreat, the statement added, without providing details on how prisoners were killed. As a result of the search, officers seized blocks of cannabis, tramadol tablet, mobile phones, and 3 grenades. Côte d'Ivoire has been criticized by rights groups and the UN for its prison conditions. Last year, the UN Committee Against Torture expressed concern over a very high rate of prison overcrowding in Côte d'Ivoire and criticized the condition, including poor sanitation, a lack of ventilation, and inadequate quality food and water. It also expressed alarm at the extent of prison violence. In April, 1 inmate of Bouaké prison died of asphyxiation and 3 people were wounded during an escape attempt. The public prosecutor's office said that it had opened an investigation into Tuesday's events. According to the online tracker Prison Insider, with 27,000 inmates, Côte d'Ivoire has many more prisoners than its jails are designed to hold, adding that Ivorian civil society organizations regularly point to the excessive use of pretrial detention and lack of sentence adjustments. However, the Ivorian authorities claim to have opened new prisons in recent years and that various presidential pardons granted between 2019 and 2023 have led to the release of around 11,000 prisoners.
Imo Edit fight that report.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
The minority in Ghana's parliament has vowed to resist any attempt to force a rerun of the parliamentary elections in the Ablekuma North constituency, which remains without representation in the 9th parliament due to unresolved electoral processes. On Wednesday, members of parliament from the New Patriotic Party staged a protest marching from Parliament House to the Ghanaian Police Service headquarters in Accra. Their demand that the Inspector General of Police deployed adequate security to allow the collation of election results to resume and conclude without further delay. Recall, Ablekuma North was among a few constituencies whose results were not finalized after the last general election. The Electoral Commission has cited a lack of inadequate security as the main reason for the delay in concluding the collation, a claim that has frustrated opposition MPs. Here is representative of the minority, Chief Whip Frank Arnaud Dompre speaking.
A subsequent high-level meeting involving the Inspector General of Police, the Electoral Commission, and the Election Security Task Force reaffirmed the importance of concluding the coalition. Yet, no action has been taken up to date. Our demands are simple and straightforward. Without mincing words, the continued disenfranchisement of the people of Ablekuma North represent not only a denial of their constitutional rights to representation, but also an affront to the democratic principles enshrined in the 1992 Constitution. This crisis erodes public trust in the integrity and independence of state institutions, particularly the Ghana Police Service. We therefore request that your office takes immediate steps without any more delay. Deploy adequate security personnel to the Electoral Commission at its designated coalition center. Ensure an enabling environment for the peaceful and lawful conclusion and coalition and declaration process in Ablekuma North. Uphold the High Court directive and cooperate fully with the EC to bring closure to this matter once and for all. The Ghana Police Service must not be perceived as the institution standing in the way of democracy. Democracy delayed is democracy denied.
That was Chief Whip Frank Arnold Domprey, a representative of the minority in Ghana's parliament. Meanwhile, Ghana's President John Dramani Mahama received the final report from the National Economic Committee this Wednesday. The 7-member committee was chaired by renowned economist Dr. Ishmael Yamson. The dialogue, a key feature of the President's 120-day social contract with Ghanaians, was held from March 3 to 4 at the Accra International Conference Center. The final report outlines a thorough analysis of Ghana's current economic challenges, proposing actionable recommendations and presenting a roadmap for restoring stability and fostering sustainable development. Here is an extract of President Mahama's speech.
When we initiated this dialogue, we were under no illusion about the gravity of the economic crisis we had inherited. Record debt, runaway inflation, high unemployment, and a complete loss of confidence in the economy's governance. The dialogue was therefore not an academic exercise. It was a necessary intervention in order to achieve our agenda to reset. The final report presented today reflects a broad consensus on what needs to be done to stabilize our economy, restore investor confidence, and put our country on a path of inclusive and resilient growth. It offers practical homegrown policy solutions across 10 priority areas. And I want to share briefly how your government is already responding. And the first is restoring fiscal discipline. One of the dialogue's most precise conclusions is that we cannot rebuild confidence in our economy without restoring fiscal discipline and eliminating structural inefficiencies. We have therefore swiftly amended the Public Financial Management Act to introduce a binding debt ceiling aimed at Ghana's debt to GDP ratio, aimed at reducing Ghana's debt to GDP ratio to no more than 45% by 2028. To support this, we are establishing an independent fiscal council by the third quarter of this year to provide professional, non-partisan oversight of the national budget and borrowing framework. This body will publish regular assessments to keep the government accountable to the people.
Ghanaian President John Dramani Mahama, just before leaving Ghana, a news report published by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, has revealed that artisanal gold mining in Ghana, while essential to the economy, is fueling criminal networks and causing significant social and environmental damage. The report, which is authored by Masina Hunter and Gideon Ofosu Pesal, entitled Mapping Ghana's Expanding Gold Sector, Part 1, notes the scale of artisanal and small-scale mining, which is estimated to represent more than 30% of the country's gold production, with a significant unreported portion estimated at between 24 and 30 tons in 2022, the equivalent of 1.74 billion US. Abdullahi Hassan reports.
The report highlights environmental damage, deforestation, mercury and cyanide pollution, as well as harmful social dynamics marked by informal labor, the exploitation of women, and violent conflict. ASGM also provides a gateway for money laundering, corruption, and criminal networks, some with links to foreign groups, particularly Chinese ones. According to GITOC, Chinese nationals are heavily involved in the sector through the introduction of heavy machinery, the illegal control of sites by local nominees, and the reinvestment of revenues into gambling and real estate. Recall WADR reported on Monday that in response to this situation, the Ghana Police Service launched a major crackdown on Galamsey in March 2025, leading to the arrest of more than 300 people in 7 regions, including at least 46 Chinese nationals. In Samrebois, an area considered the epicenter of illegal gold mining, several seizures of bulldozers, excavators, firearms and mining equipment were made. Authorities say the fight against illegal gold mining is now a national priority. The authors of the report are calling for increased satellite monitoring, strict regulation of toxic products, and greater inclusion of women in support programs. The Savannah region of Ghana, the new epicenter of the phenomenon, is receiving particular attention.
Abdullahi Hassan with that report. You are still listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Here is a reminder of our top stories. Ivorian opposition party leader Tijan Cham appeals to the UN following his removal from the electoral roll. Ghana's minority vows to resist a rerun at Ablekuma North, demands immediate conclusion of election results. Still ahead in the news, national dialogue in Senegal concludes with mixed results. And Nigeria's President Tinubu approves release of 2 billion naira, 20 trucks of rice for Mokwa flood victims. We also have guest interview and sports news. Please stay with us.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Many thanks for staying with us. We are streaming live on YouTube at WADR News and on Facebook, WADR English Service. Now, right here in Senegal, the national dialogue on its political system officially concluded this Wednesday after several days of discussions. Over 700 participants from various societal groups took part in the exchange. The dialogue was organized into 3 commissions. The Democracy, Freedoms and Human Rights Commission achieved 100% consensus. The Electoral Process Commission saw 94% agreement among its participants. However, the Institutional Reforms and Election Management Bodies Commission reached only 26% convergence. For more insights, you can listen to an excerpt from the speech by Dr. Sheikh Gay, the facilitator of the National Dialogue.
Ce dialogue n'a pas été un simple exercice de forme. Il a été un espace de parole libre, un lieu de vérité.
This dialogue was not a simple exercise in form. It was a space for free speech, a place of truth, a moment of collective lucidity. Compromises have been found, disagreements have been assumed, but above all, a base of consensus has emerged. We are now going to transmit this foundation to the President of the Republic, whose commitment to give it substance was reiterated during his speech opening the dialogue. It is also up to all the institutions of the Republic, but also to you, the citizens, to take ownership of them in order to build a fairer, more inclusive and more democratic Senegal. In total, we obtained 100% consensus in Commission. 2. We have dared to deconstruct the routines of the political game. This dialogue has been a therapy against resentments, tensions and violence that we overcome. We now give way to lasting appeasement that reassures investors and entrepreneurs.
Prouver sa maturité, sa grandeur, sa capacité à se réinventer.
Dr. Sheikh Gay is the facilitator of the just concluded national dialogue in Senegal. Let's take you to Nigeria, where relief efforts are now underway in Mokwa, Niger State, following a devastating flood that has devastated more than 200 people, left them dead and submerged over 500 homes. The tragedy triggered a swift response from federal and state authorities, as well as international humanitarian organizations. In Chad, the release of socialist Robert Gam coincides with the hearing of Succès Masra, an opposition figure imprisoned in a case deemed political by his supporters. Robert Gam, Secretary General of the Socialist Party Without Borders, a party funded by the late opposition leader Yaya Dillo, was released on the evening of June 3 after 8 months of being in detention at the General Intelligence Service. The reasons for his arrest have not been made public.
Politics, analyses on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
Well, our guest interview focuses on the 2024 World's Most Neglected Displaced Crisis Index released by the Norwegian Refugee Council NRC, which highlights displacement as a major setback to Burkina Faso's educational sector, despite climbing 4 places up in the latest ranking. Cameroon emerged as the highest on the index globally, with Ethiopia, Mozambique, Uganda and Mali all in the ranks. Declining humanitarian funding, media attention, and effective political engagement to end conflicts were emphasized as prime causes of the neglected displacement. Annie Trinonda is the Regional Program Director at the NRC.
So NRC Neglected Crisis Report for 2024 brings Cameroon at the first place in the ranking. That's not the first time, actually that's the third time in 8 years that Cameroon ranks first in terms of most neglected crisis in the world. That was already the case in 2018 and 2019. When it comes to Cameroon, the main reasons are that so Cameroon is impacted by 3 different humanitarian crises in 3 different regions of the country, now experience a quite large scale of internal displacement, with more than 1 million people being internally displaced, but also more than 500,000 people being refugees coming from Nigeria or Central African Republic. Cameroon is a perfect example of totally neglected crisis because it brings very little attention from diplomatic actors.
So media attention and then diplomatic engagement plus humanitarian assistance, if these 3 elements fall short in specific countries, then it means that it obviously falls within this particular range. Again, one is to talk about Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso's issue is quite peculiar because it happens to do with matters of education.
So Burkina Faso, I think, is one of the countries in the region most affected by internal displacement. It's more than 2 million people that have been internally displaced because of the crisis. So on Burkina Faso, we have somehow highlighted the impact of the crisis and of the displacement on the access to education. So that's one of the consequences of the crisis, but definitely not a root cause of the crisis. So among the root cause of the crisis, you will find the level of armed conflict, but also climatic shocks and resulting in food insecurity. But one other consequence is the lack of access to education services for the children that have been displaced because of the conflict.
So going forward, how could we resolve some of these internally displaced issues happening in various countries, and how could the diplomatic community also engage further to resolve and then ensure humanitarian response to some of these, both internally displacement and then refugees as well?
Yes, actually, that's the whole purpose of this report, is to increase the level of attention on this neglected crisis and mobilize efforts from, I would say, the different sides of stakeholders that could bring some support. And I mean, definitely that should be a collective effort from diplomatic actors that, for many of them, could, by paying more attention, support the solving of some conflict. Definitely media, because all of that is pretty linked, and a higher level of media attention will also bring more attention from diplomatic and political actors. And finally, funding and funding for humanitarian assistance that would help humanitarian actors to better support populations affected by the crisis. So I would say that's a collective and combined effort that this annual report is also aiming to promote.
Has this by any way increased the level of gender-based violence that women experience in these countries?
In general, women and children are very often among the most affected people by any conflict, any armed conflict, and any displacement. Protection is also often among the less funded sectors among the different sectors. We are quite concerned that due to the overall reduction in humanitarian funding, actually the level of response to gender-based violence could even decrease.
Anne Trihonda is the Regional Program Director at the Norwegian Refugee Council. And here is Sankule Janko with sports.
Let's begin with women's sports, because Nigeria's Super Falcons secured a moral boasting 2-0 victory over the indomitable Lionesses of Cameroon in a friendly match held on Tuesday at the MKO Abiola Sports Complex in Abeokuta. Team captain Rasidat Ajibade led by example, netting both goals in the first half. The friendly is part of Nigeria's preparation for the 13th edition of the Women's Africa Cup of Nations WAFCON, scheduled to take place in Morocco from July 5 to 26. Elsewhere, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has praised the Pyramids FC following their landmark victory in the CAF Champions League, calling it a proud moment for Egyptian sports. Pyramids FC claimed their first ever CAF Champions League title on Sunday with a 2-1 win over South Africa's Mamelodi Sundowns in the second leg of the final held in Cairo. The result sealed a 3-2 aggregate victory for the Egyptian side. In other news, Brentford winger Brian Burmo has reportedly set his sight on a move to Manchester United despite attracting interest from several other Premier League clubs. Multiple sources indicate that the 24-year-old Cameroon international views United as the ideal next step in his career. Burmo is said to be drawn to the club's statue and the opportunity to be part of their rebuilding project aimed at restoring their place at the top of English football. And finally, the International Football Association Board, IFAB, the board responsible for football's laws, has now stated that if a player unintentionally makes 2 touches when taking a penalty, the kick must be retaken rather than invalidated. This comes following the controversy over disallowed penalty by Julian Alvarez during Atletico Madrid's Champions League round of 16 clash against Real Madrid. During the tense match shootout, VAR revealed that Alvarez's left foot had made slight contact with the ball just before he struck it with his right. Alvarez scored the penalty, but it was chalked off, and Atletico lost the shootout and was out of the UEFA Champions League. The International Football Association IFAB has stated that under these situations, the penalty must be retaken.
Thanks to Sankula Janko for the sports news. With that, we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Mustafa Sek and Umun Dayogo for the technical assistance. Do interact with us via our social media platforms, X, Instagram at WADR News, and on Facebook, WADR English Service. Coming up at the bottom of the hour is WADR's flagship gender program 50-50 with Nadi Titi. I am Augustine Cully. Good evening.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via Hot 104.3 FM, Newmi FM 94.0,
Hilltop Radio 104.7 FM,
and Veritas Radio 102.9 in Banjul, the Gambia. We also appreciate our listeners in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.